Today we're going to focus on Martinique and Costa Rica. Costa Rica, you know, is in Central America. Martinique is an island in we already had the discussion beforehand and decided from the geographer that we're calling it the Caribbean. And if you have any questions for these speakers, please type them in the chat at the end and they'll answer them either at the end of the presentation or at the end of the event. So first, we'll just go in alphabetical order. So we'll start first up with Costa Rica. Professors Steve Jambroni from biology and Michelle Riley from our hospitality management school visited Costa Rica not long before the world ended, by which I mean COVID started and all the borders slammed shut.
We didn't cause that, but yeah, we got back right before that, yeah.
So the borders slammed shut to human travelers, but apparently viruses are allowed to travel pretty much at will. But Michelle and Steve are still planning to take students to Costa Rica, and today they're going to tell us about this delightful land. So go ahead.
All right, good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Jeanette, I've got privileges to do that, I'm assuming.
Yes, you should.
Excellent. So let me go here and let me bring up some slides. Let me get us to where we need to be, first of all. So thanks everybody for letting us have this opportunity to talk about our trip. We've got a lot of things to share with you about what we discovered on our exploratory trip that we are hoping to share with students. This would be tentatively scheduled for a year from this coming December, mainly because needed to have time over the breaks and having that superimposed over time when coffee harvest is happening in country. So December during our winter break is the perfect time to be there. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, we get to travel in December 2022. So I'm going to kind of get us started in, why we're interested in doing this trip and get us started. I'm going to hand it off to Michelle. She's going to take you through some of the locations, and then I'll kind of wrap it up at the end. So why are we interested in doing this trip? So, you probably already know some things about Costa Rica. It's a very tourist-friendly country. It's a relatively peaceful oasis in what's been very, at least it can be, has been in the past, a tumultuous history in terms of violence and political unrest in other Central American countries. Tourism is a huge part of the economy. It's a beautiful place. The people are friendly. Those are all reasons to travel there, but the focus for our interest here was to look at two crops that are really important in terms of the products that we like to consume in massive quantities here in the United States, which is coffee and chocolate, which comes from cacao. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that as our focus. Don't worry, the wall of black and white words here isn't gonna scare you too much. You guys will have access to the recording, and Michelle and I can give you our slides and give you some of the statistics. But, we're doing this trip because we drink a lot of coffee, and we're interested in making sure that students and other participants understand all of the variables that go into how these products that start in a tropical country, not in the United States, end up, either in our cup or in our chocolate bar. So yeah, we drink a lot of coffee in the United States. I'm not going to read through all the statistics. I think this is pretty much well known. But the last little point here about how as a single market, as a single country, the United States imports about 48% of the coffee exported out of Costa Rica. I mean, of course, we get coffee from other places around the world, but in terms of their export, we're a big market for Costa Rican coffee. For cacao, the cacao beans are not a huge part of the Costa Rican economy in terms of exports. It used to be much larger. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But again, as you can see in my first bullet here, it's Costa Rica is a large exporter of cocoa beans to the U.S. So just some statistics to kind of get us started. Before I turn it over to Michelle, let me kind of get us oriented in terms of geography. Professor Hardy hopefully will be pleased that I'm doing this, but I want to show you where we're going. So here we are. If you can see, I've got to move. Hold on, I'm going to move you guys. There you are. All your faces are in the way. I love your faces though. Here we are in Kansas City. And of course, our destination is down here in Central America. So once we get there, I've got another little map to kind of orient ourselves. The capital is San Jose. We're going to fly in and out of the capital where the airport, international airport is. So we'll start there. But when we arrive, our plan is to, the same day, leave on a bus to get to one of the biggest coffee production places in the country, which is called the Los Santos Coffee Region. It's called Los Santos because the little towns are named after Catholic saints. Beautiful place. Michelle's going to talk about that. From there, we'll spend a couple nights, but from there, we'll go up north to the Monteverde region, a pretty well-known tourist area in the country. The Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve is there near the little town, and we'll get access to that, and we'll talk about what we're going to do there. From there, we're going to spend a couple nights, and then we're going to go down to the other tourist town on the Caribbean side, known as Coweta, and it's also a tourist town. There's we're going to spend a couple nights there, but along the way, we're going to stop at a pineapple production field and meet someone. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. We'll spend time in Coweta. We're going to visit a local indigenous group of people and learn some of the indigenous uses of cacao. And then from there, we'll come back to San Jose. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle, and she's going to take you into Costa Rica.
All right. So I'm going to just go through what Steve said. So this was my initial, how does coffee go from this plant to your cup? So I like that picture. The coffee cherry is so beautiful. I don't think I realized that before I went down to Costa Rica. And I've got my cup of, this is actually Costa Rican coffee. Let's hopefully, I don't normally drink coffee this late, so hopefully I can sleep tonight, but I did it for you guys to, be authentic. I wanted to show a little bit about what the coffee cherry looks like. And this is a picture from, a diagram from one of the actual places we visited. So this Dota was the first one that we went to. I think it was the second day. We got in kind of late at night, stayed in San Jose, and then this is where we went the second day. And it was in that region that Steve was talking about. Very beautiful. You can see there what the coffee cherry looks like, and you have the endosperm, endocarp, mesocarp, different parts of that. And I thought it was really interesting even to look at like what percentages they made up. So, having it's about 42% pulp, it's about 20% water. So there's a decent amount of those on there. And then hopefully no one's offended that I think this was Steve's hand. So I'm guessing this was in his mouth, but we actually got to put like the coffee cherry, in our mouth and chew it and pull the seeds out. That's not normally how it's done, but that is how that picture was obtained. And it was interesting. I wouldn't suggest doing that with lots of them, but to kind of just see what it really tasted like. And it honestly didn't have a lot of flavor before all the other processes go into that. So we go through a little bit of, and I'm going to probably jump through these pictures really quickly. It's just the process. So where we were, you can see a bunch of trucks were coming in and bringing the coffee. Interestingly, it used to be that, I guess when you went to Costa Rica, it was actually harder to find good coffee to drink in Costa Rica because it was so expensive and it was mostly exported. But now you're seeing a lot more shops and more locals being able to enjoy that coffee. But you can see bringing it in by trucks. So a truckload of the coffee cherries. I'll see if we can get the little videos to work. I don't want to show, we have a few little videos. I'll just show little clips, but they come off the truck and they're actually, and Steve, if you remember, I'm blanking on what these are called, but this is the unit that they gather them in. And it's the standard unit that then the truck is compensated. The company who brings them in is compensated by, how many of those were filled through that truck. So I had it in my head and I'm blanking on it. But that was,
I can't remember the name either. And of course it's in Spanish. So
yeah, I can't remember. But it was really interesting to even learn, okay, this is how the process goes. Before the truck leaves, they have a record of how much they brought. So that goes into, obviously the payment for delivering those. This is one way that they are processed. So after they come in, this is a wet process, and I'll talk a little bit about other ones. But you can see that they're running through, the water, and water is a big part of how they're processed. So actually a lot of the plants were talking about even, recycling the water and how to be more eco-friendly with the amount of water that they were using in these processes. This is a separate place we went to. So we went to several different coffee processing and farms, and they all had a little bit different equipment. And this was one in a smaller town that we went to in San Luis that I'll talk more about in a minute. But you can see, they're actually getting, most of the pulp is taken off of that cherry bean. So there we have that. Through. And you're also left with a big pile of pulp. And I realized I have some of this still. So one of the places we got was selling, they call it a coffee fruit extraction. And really it's like the pulp. And so I pulled some out, you can't really see it, but it's pulp. Woo, I'm gonna get that all on my computer. But it's dried pulp that then you make tea essentially with it. So it was really cool. That was a fun product we brought back. So my tip is to leave room in your suitcase when you're going to bring back all the coffee and fun things. So you can see that most of them aren't necessarily doing anything with the pulp. I think that's kind of a new thing, but it was interesting to see how they were using other parts of it as well. So lots of different processes, but the traditional process is after it's washed and the pulp is removed during those processes, it is dried. And they're normally dried just out like you see here on a big concrete slab often. That way they can be raked constantly. So they're constantly in motion. Different beans are exposed to the sun to dry. So it's a slow drying process. They even had some almost like Ferris wheel looking equipment that kind of rotated things as they dried too. So you can see, large quantities of these drying out here. This was another place that we went to, and this is actually one Steve and I just kind of showed up at, and they don't really normally do tours, but they were really gracious and showed us and would love to take students back. And you can see that these look different. And that is because these are processed differently and not the traditional wet method, which is how most coffee is processed. This is done in there are two other processes. One's called natural, where they leave all of the pulp on. So it's dried with all of that pulp on, which creates a very different taste. It's sweeter when it is then roasted, although you wouldn't want to roast that the same way you roasted other coffee because you wouldn't want to burn all those sugars, et cetera. So you have to be more careful with it. And then there's also the honey roasted, which is kind of in between. So not all of the pulp is left on it, but a lot of the pulp is still on that honey roasted coffee. And we were lucky enough to try a lot of those. And so one of the places we went to in San Luis actually gave us a tasting of all of them and got to see how those were processed differently. So it's very interesting to see how they work. I don't want to get too much into that because I know we don't have much time, but this one was really interesting because they also talked a lot about how a lot of the workers are from different countries who are coming in during coffee season to harvest. And so they were showing us facilities that they provided, schools, other things like that for these individuals and their families, which was really nice to see. So we would like students to see that as well. And then roasting, you can do that. This is the old, traditional way of roasting those beans, which was really cool to see. And we actually got to do that. So students could definitely practice that. This is a good picture of that with the roasting process. And then you can see, obviously, unroasted and roasted in terms of how dark they're getting. And those were done on the kind of the old school traditional way. And this is more of a classic roast. But one thing I wanted to point out is just the different types of roasts. Most people assume that the darker the roast, the higher caffeine content, but it's actually the opposite. So actually, a lighter roast has more caffeine typically, a darker roast has less caffeine. So just something to know. I learned that then. I'm pretty caffeine sensitive, so I can't have too much. And I'm glad I learned that there, because I just naturally assumed the opposite. And then another thing is all coffee in Costa Rica has to be 100% Arabica, which there are two major varieties, Arabica and Robusto of coffee. And they have different qualities, but all of it in Costa Rica has to be Arabica, that they're not allowed to grow the other variety in there. So we found, some finished bags. We unfortunately couldn't fit one of those in our suitcase, but we tried. And then lastly, this is in San Luis, which is close to Monteverde. We found this little town, and I think we lucked out. There was a really cool coffee roaster that then connected us with a community activist kind of who worked on this community. And you can see down here, they've built this little eco lodge, which this is not a great picture, but it's the only picture we could find that we took of it. And this is like one of the buildings, and they have a dorm building that's made for groups to come and stay. And it was just really such a cool, welcoming community. And so we wanted to just show where we would take students to stay. And in that this is a view from another group we got to see in the community that did sugarcane. So this woman just opened her home and facility to us that day on a whim, because someone else called her and said, hey, these people are in town, can they come see what you do? And she does classes and things on sugarcane. So that's also something, we got even more crops that we can show students while we were down there. So the networking and the friendliness of all the people there was amazing. And I wanted to end my talk with this because I love food and I love breakfast food. And so this was one of my favorite breakfasts, which you can get a variety of that around, in lots of different Central American countries, but I just wanted to end that there, and I'll let Steve finish on the rest of the trip.
Yeah, it's interesting. Costa Rica is not really known for its cuisine. It doesn't really have any kind of standout national cuisine. I mean, it's not like Mexico, where the different regions of Mexico are known for their different types of cuisine. But we had a lot of good food, didn't we, Michelle? I can't think of any one bad meal we had when we were there. So let me hang on a minute. Let me get things rearranged and repositioned here back into my PowerPoint. So we had some good food. So I'm going to start right here. This was a meal that we had, or I had. This is mine. Just a local fish. It's freshwater fish, locally sourced. Potatoes, vegetables. At one of the places we stayed. This is going back to the Los Santos region that we started at, and looking at the view from the lodge where we were at is provided by this photo right here. So we stayed in some really nice places that allowed access to the facilities we're visiting, as well as, for example, this is in the highlands back in the Los Santos region. Lots of hiking trails coming out from all these little cabinas that are all around. There's also a larger dormitory where, like, probably most of our students, when we take them, would stay. A lot of wildlife, flora and fauna. You can see the hummingbird feeders. A really beautiful place. Michelle, was talking about the San Luis region, which is, part of that region that's further north. And the town that's more familiar in that northern part is Monteverde. And in the little township of Monteverde, it's kind of a touristy town, but Kubure Coffee, which is a actual restaurant and coffee shop, and they have a demonstration building to demonstrate coffee from chocolate from the bean to the product. So We're going to switch over and talk a little bit about cacao and chocolate now. I've got coffee on the brain, but let's talk about chocolate. So this Kabore Cafe is a little, shop in the town there. And Bob, our host, who is a co-owner of this facility, has this kind of cool little demonstration facility, which is kind of nice for students to see, when we first start looking at this process, in country. So in the back, if you remember the very first photograph in the opening slide, there was a picture of the cacao pod growing off of the stem of the plant. That was taken basically in the backyard of this building. He has a small garden and he has some cacao plants growing there. But of course, most of the beans that he's getting for the source of the very fine chocolate that they sell in his shop are coming from the community farmers in the areas that are growing and then also fermenting those beans before they're shipped. And he even talked quite a bit about how he's very particular. He knows a lot of the producers, and he's very particular about picking out the beans that are going to make high quality chocolate. One of the things Michelle and I are going to work on that we didn't get a chance to experience ourselves is actually going to some of those small farms, meeting some of those producers, and actually walking around in the fields, looking at the process of harvest if we're able to, or at least seeing the fermentation, which after the pods are harvested and the beans are extracted. I'm going to show you some more slides. They have to be fermented, and that takes about 7 days, give or take. And then they're taken out of the fermentation chambers, which are just wooden boxes, and then they're ready to be processed. And of course, the first part of that is to roast them. So you can see his setup here. He's got a little roasting. It's just a toaster oven with a little rotisserie cage. And he actually roasted these while he was talking about cacao. And then the beans have to be crushed or partially ground to separate the nibs, which is the actual seed inside the seed coat. And then all of that kind of chaff that is on the outside, the seed coat has to be removed through a process known as winnowing. So he has this little vacuum apparatus here to kind of blow off or vacuum off a lot of that and separate the nibs from all the stuff that you don't want. And a couple other aspects that he actually demonstrated. It was really a beginning to end demonstration. The next step would be the conching of the chocolate, which is basically mixing at a fairly high rate, adding in things like emulsifiers, lecithin, or even adding in more cocoa butter to improve the quality. And that's a process that takes a little bit of time. And then after that, of course, comes the tempering for high quality chocolate. And it's the tempering that uses heat over a certain amount of time to condition the crystals in the chocolate to be of uniform size and a small enough size so that you get the quality that you expect from high quality chocolate. The smooth mouthfeel, the glossy sheen that you see on the surface because of the reflection of light. The product has to be tempered. So he's demonstrating that. That's what he's doing here. You can see Michelle is looking and ready to start sampling, as we all did. One of the nice things about doing this is that we get to sample both the coffee and the chocolate products that we're looking at as part of the process. So, of course, this is in Monteverde. The other thing that we have going on in Monteverde is, again, very nice lodging. So this is a photograph of a sunset looking out from the little restaurant on the grounds of our hotel in Monteverde. And some other activities we've got planned include a night hike through the rainforest, which is provided by local guides through parts of the parkland that are established. So it's safe, but we do see lots of critters. Michelle, you have to remind me, I know we saw some snakes, we saw insects. Did we hear howler monkeys? And didn't we see a howler monkey, I think? you remember
I
that?
don't remember seeing them on this, but we definitely saw sloths sleeping in the tree.
Oh, yes. And of course, we'll look at sloths in Coweta as well. But this was a good experience. It'll be nice for students to see. In addition to that, we're going to get access into the Monteverde Cloud Forest so students can actually see that national park. There's a lot of activities. We'll probably have some zip lining, which is really popular at that location, set up for students to participate in and get a glimpse of the rainforest from the zip lines. So that's Monteverde. I'm gonna pop back and remind you that we're gonna go back now to Coweta, which is on the Caribbean coast, but we're gonna stop on the way in the little town of Guasimo. And the reason we're gonna do that, as Michelle mentioned, a lot of the things that went into building this trip, we kind of built, in country, in situ, so to speak. So we were able to connect with a colleague who teaches at one of the Catholic universities in San Jose, who in turn connected us to a local grassroots activist who is trying to bring awareness regarding the groundwater pollution issues around the corporate industrial production of pineapple in and around the location that we're going to talk about, this little area called Guasimo. And of course, pineapple production was not part of the plan when we developed this course or this, trip, but we felt this really fit into the paradigm and the program, because it's a great way to connect students to some of the local activists that are trying to bring awareness to this issue. We know Costa Rica as this, oasis in terms of awareness of ecology and, this history of a peaceful nation. But, underneath all that are some real issues. The corporations Del Monte and Dole own a lot of land and have been buying more and more land in this region. The production of pineapple uses a lot of pesticides and chemicals, which are actually leaching into the groundwater. It was interesting talking with Erlinda, who is the activist, and just realizing the history. I mean, there are cooperatives regarding the groundwater, because this is the source of potable water in these communities and has been since the 1800s. So some of these cooperatives that were actually created back in the 1800s to, create and then manage the potable water system. And those are being compromised. People are showing up in clinics with kidney and skin issues, liver problems, and great numbers in the past couple of decades. You can't appreciate it, but this is pineapple fields. I don't know if it's Del Monte or Dole, it's one of the two. But before this is clear cut, it was rainforest. I mean, it looked more like this. You'd see trees and a diversity of plants. And now, of course, it's all monoculture pineapple. So close-up view of some pineapple plants. So we'll look at that. It'll be a good experience to see students with some of the local activists that have been recognized for their work and trying to bring awareness to this. I'll leave you with this. If you eat pineapple, make sure, or any pineapple product, pineapple juice, canned pineapple, make sure you know it's from organic farming practices. It's harder to find, it will be more expensive, but none of this is organically or sustainably farmed. This is all corporate, farming procedures that are done. So anyway, from there, we're going to make our way to Coweta. And Coweta is a tourist town. It's pretty well established. It's not a big town, as you can see, as I kind of play the little video of a little glimpse. We're looking out from our hotel, which is a lodge that's on a national park. So in front of you here is the town of Coweta, really quaint little town. But behind looks like this. We're almost at high tide. You can see the high tide line right about here. So the tide was coming in, but yeah, we've got basically a beach and a tropical paradise in the backyard. What you can't appreciate it, but this is the park per se. This is the actual parkland here. You have to get entrance. We'll have entrance to go in with students, with tour guides. And of course, when we're there, we'll have a tour guide showing us all of the nice things to see. I put up a couple cheesy photographs of some of the fauna that I took with my phone through one of the oculars of a pair of binoculars that we had. So I wanted to stop at this critter. Anybody know what that critter is? If you've been to Costa Rica or Central America, you might know it. Its nickname is the Jesus Christ lizard because it can walk on water very quickly though. So it's a lizard. It kind of scurries across, streams. It has web feet and it can run across creeks. And it's called a basilisk, and they're all over the place. Anyway, I got a shot of that through the binoculars. This, I'm pretty sure, Michelle, is a three-toed sloth that we're able to see in the park behind the lodge. Three-toed sloths are more active during the day. Usually, the two-toed sloths are also in the park, more active at night. So lots of stuff for students to see in terms of fauna. But I know we're getting short on time. One of the other things we'll be able to get to do based in Cahuita is to visit an indigenous tribe called the Bribri. And there they've got a demonstration set up looking at medicinal indigenous uses of certain plant products. And this is a plant that's actually related to the lychee fruit. And you can see that this woman who's part of our little tour is getting a manicure, Bribri style, using some natural products from the plants. They do grow cacao, and of course, they demonstrated some of the traditional ways of preparing and processing cacao beans. They also had a little demonstration area that had a bunch of poison arrow frogs. And yes, if you hike back into the tropical rainforest in Costa Rica and other Central American countries, you are likely to find the fairly numerous poison arrow frogs. They do secrete poisonous toxins on the skin, so you don't want to handle them. They're kind of in a pit, so you couldn't get too close to them, but they're so cute. They're so pretty. But yeah, we had some demonstration of traditional roasting of cacao beans on an open fire, and also the crushing of the beans. This is to separate the shell from the nibs from the shell. Everybody's got one of these at home, right? And then the traditional way of winnowing. And then all the way to the grinding of the nibs into the, the semi-liquid, coffee liquor that is here. Yes, some of the people got to take a turn at trying to grind that. It's not as easy as you think. And then, of course, the final product. And yeah, there's sampling along the way. So here's a photo. This is what the pod, if you want to call it a pod, would look like for the cacao plant. Inside would be the beans surrounded by a kind of a white, sweet pulp. And all of that, of course, has to be fermented for about 7 days in wooden boxes. And then after that, the beans are taken out and then roasted, ground, winnowed, and, and then turned into what we call chocolate.
So I think, yeah, basically the message is do not go to Costa Rica with an empty suitcase.
Yes, you're going to want to bring
I'm sorry, with a full suitcase. You want to go empty.
Yeah, you want to be able to bring things home, and you'll have lots of opportunity to sample a lot of products. So you'll need room in your suitcase.
But don't bring home one of those Jesus lizards.
Oh, you don't want a basilisk in your backyard?
No.
Custom
Very quickly, so we're back to San Jose, and this is at Cafe Brit. You guys might have bought coffee from Cafe Brit. We did a little tour of that. We'd like to take students on. And then our last night is at the Marriott Hacienda Hotel, which has its own miniature coffee plantation on the grounds. This is very close to the airport, so it's a logical place to end our trip. And I know I probably went a little bit too long, but that's it.
Well, it looks like a beautiful, beautiful time and a tasty time in Costa Rica. And Martinique is also a beautiful destination. I know this because I sat in a snowstorm in Kansas City in January and looked at Facebook pictures from Professor Hardy and Professor Eric Elizabeth's trip. So go ahead, Martinique.
All right, I will get things started with a picture from our hotel room the first night Dr. Elizabeth and I were in Martinique. This is literally from our hotel, and this is our view of the Caribbean from there. So where is Martinique? Martinique might be something you've heard of or a place you've heard of, but you might not exactly know where it is. It is considered part of North America. It's part of the Caribbean island chain, and it's highlighted here on this particular map. It's closer to South America than it is to the mainland of the United States. But even within the Caribbean, it's a relatively small island. The island is roughly the size of Johnson County with a population of Overland Park and Olathe combined. So it's pretty small population, but it does bring in some interesting mixtures that we're going to be discussing today. To begin with, Martinique is a volcano. It's part of this volcanic chain that makes up the Caribbean island chain. And this is Mount Pelée, which we'll talk about here on the next slide, but it's volcanic. It's also a French territory. It's a part of France, much like Hawaii is part of the United States. The sights, the smells, the sounds, they're all going to be French. You'll see cobblestone streets. You'll see signage in French. As you walk down the street, you're going to hear French. And then there are these lovely cafes with some delicious pastries that Dr. Elizabeth and I took advantage of while we were there. All reminders of France, and that there's this Caribbean vibe at the same time. But to be honest, quite frankly, it's paradise. It's just amazing views regardless of where you are. Again, it's a relatively small island, and so regardless of where you are, you're always within close proximity of a coast, whether it be the Atlantic or the Caribbean. Well, I remember first hearing about Martinique when I was in elementary school. I had an entire lesson plan about this 1902 eruption of Mount Pelée, which was pictured with the previous slide. It's devastated, actually, you might say destroyed the town of Saint-Pierre, which was the then capital of Martinique. There were only 2 survivors that stayed within Saint-Pierre. Everyone else evacuated or died during this eruption. One person was on the outskirts. We'll ignore him for the time being, because it's the story of this other survivor that I remember hearing about when I was in elementary school. This individual, you can see the scarring on his shoulder and his arm from the burns. He survived because he was in jail. So he wasn't sure he was going to survive the eruption because the temperatures, the ash, the burning ash, as well as these gases that were being released, but he did survive and became a celebrity after this eruption. In fact, he toured with circuses for the rest of his life as the survivor of the Martinique 1902 volcanic eruption. Dr. Elizabeth.
Okay, a little bit of, can you hear me? Do I have my, yes, a little bit of history. So Martinique has been French in 1635 when the first settler came to Martinique. And pretty soon they started cultivating sugarcane. And the reason of that is mainly for the sugar, because back then it was a really rare item and in high demand. So they started cultivating sugarcane. And they've been, and for that reason, actually, because he brought a lot of money. It was kind of like oil today, sugarcane was. And for this reason, Martinique was attacked by the British, which tried to take it over in 1759, but also by the Dutch, which were also known for marine, the ability to cross the oceans. England, actually, the British, were able to keep it for maybe a couple of years, but not that long, and through negotiation gave it back to France. And the main reason the attack, they wanted to take over the sugarcane industry in Martinique. And to keep that sugarcane, that's when slavery started in Martinique. So they brought people from West Africa to Martinique to help with the sugarcane, which was again a huge business. And roughly in the first time in 1848, slavery was abolished in France. Actually, it had been abolished on the French territory a long, long time ago, like I think in the 14th century. But specifically in Martinique, in the colonies, all the French colonies, including Martinique, it had been abolished in 1848 by this guy named Victor Schulcher. He's really, you see a street named after him, school named after him, and this library that's in Fort-de-France, the capital of Martinique. This is a lovely library. I think it was made in France on the mainland and transported to Martinique. And what you see next to it is is Fort-de-France. Actually, this is a fort in the capital of Fort-de-France, because once Saint-Pierre was completely burned down, the center of Martinique moved to Fort-de-France. And the fort was used to defend against the British and the Dutch. And when slavery was abolished, they still needed, more cheap labor. So they had, which might not be known, they had workers from India, the country India, coming to Martinique. So you have the West African, slavery was abolished, but they wouldn't work for low wages. And then so they started hiring people from India. They brought some Indian, and they started, integrating into the population. And you can see on this what I'm eating right now. You see this sort of gray thing. This plate is sort of a testimony of the cross between West Africa and Indian cuisine in Martinique. And one thing I have a hard time to find anywhere but in Martinique, it was my second time going to Martinique, is that vegetable you see in the middle, like gray-looking vegetable. It's sort of a potato that grows in Martinique. And you can sort of guess with the rice a curry flavor, and that's a testimony from the Indian being moving to France, but also something named akra. That's more of a testimony from West African. So the cuisine from Martinique is sort of a mix between Indian cuisine and West African cuisine and French cuisine, here. So, all right.
Well, as I mentioned, Martinique is this small island in the Caribbean, and because of that, there are a number of things that the people of Martinique have to take into consideration. This is true of any smaller island. They have to take into consideration, where are they going to get their fresh drinking water? Where are they going to have electricity come from? What happens if there's a storm? You can't just necessarily hunker down from a hurricane. There are realities that come into play. And so this has led to this emphasis on sustainability, and something that the French government has very much been promoting within Martinique. And Dr. Elizabeth will expand upon this.
Sorry. So there's this plan that by 2030, Martinique would be basically 100% sustainable. They will not depend on any, their energy will come from renewable sources. Okay? So even as today, if you look in 2016, 6% of the electricity was from renewable energy, and about 3 years later, they went up to 25%. The idea is to get to 100% by 2030. So they use biomass, they use solar energy, and one thing they've done, and they use wind energy, and one thing they've done also is, as of today, they've given 45,000 families in Martinique a solar water heater. So the water heater is a solar water heater, and 45,000 families have been able to obtain one from basically the French government, especially the low income family, and they're hoping by 2023 to double that amount. So essentially every year they give out, so they install water heater in 8,000 families across the island. Right, moving on. So, the main goal of our trip essentially is to look at bananas in Martinique and how the island has been able to get to this, to apply sustainable agriculture, sustainable principles. And up until now, what's interesting in Martinique, probably in the 80s or late 70s, going there was more of an elite destination. There aren't that many people going there from France, And starting in the mid 80s, it became this mass tourism destination, where the second mass tourism destination, and building up hotels and especially in agriculture in bananas, which was had been growing only since the 1920s, or even not that long ago, not like sugarcane, which was started being grown in 1700 or 1600. Bananas came later, much later. And but it was really intensive culture and using tons and tons of pesticides. And that's why when Martinique put in place this plan in 2008, this initiative where they will change completely the way not only they run the island, not as much tourism, but different types of tourism, I should say, but also more sustainable practices for growing bananas, because bananas is a big part of their economy. I find out that basically banana is the #1 fruit consumed in the world, and also the #1 fruit produced in the world. And they export these bananas to Europe, mostly to France and the other countries. In Europe, there's only, out of 28 countries, there's only 3 countries able to produce banana. This is Portugal, Spain, and Martinique. So, like I was saying, so they start changing the way they produce bananas, because they want to be able to sustain that for years to come, decades to come. So the first thing they did is they let the land rest. So for a year or two, they didn't produce at all bananas to have the land sort of resting. And then they get the help of a huge help of a research institute, that focuses on sustainable agriculture, but in tropical region. And that research institute has been able to come up with a banana that's not as sensitive to pests, so they don't have to use as much pesticides. And that was a huge progress. So not only they have that institute research center helping them through the production, but also they have another, so there's 2 research institutes, another one that helps them applying those research findings into the land. So like I said, first they stop growing anything, and then they focus a lot on the soil, on the chemistry, on the biological activity of the soil. And so the first thing they did is to grow specific ground covers, 2 type of ground covers, and you can see a little bit on the floor here, on the land, because the most, they had been used a lot of, they used to use that much pesticides. So now with the ground cover, they were able to reduce the use of pesticide within 10 years by 75%. So it just went down. And also, as you can see, they protect their bananas. Something I find out is, which I didn't realize, I learned about the first time I went to Martinique, is that bananas don't grow on a tree. It's a plant, it's a plant, and it's a plant that's to 10 feet tall, to 10 feet tall. And you can see the guy here next to his banana plant. And one thing they also did is just in Martinique itself, there's 300 family farms that are growing bananas. And every week, they send 27 million of bananas to Europe. Every week they send this from those roughly 200 family farms. And that research institutes helps them during the whole process from planting to harvesting. It's a pretty active collaboration. So not only they've been able to reduce, as I said, the number of pesticides, but when you do, and also the workforce, the labor force, how can I say, it's the number one private company that has the highest number of employees in Martinique. Let me repeat that. So this Banana Corporation or Association is the number one in Martinique in terms of hiring people to work on bananas. So it's an important part of the economy. And let me make sure I don't forget. Yes. So they send us bananas every year to Europe, and the approach they have had, lately is sort of like the wine approach, the wine industry in France. Is a label that certifies the quality of the banana. So they have this specific label, that the condition in which they grew the bananas. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to mention, all the workers that work on those banana plants in the different farms, they get 5 weeks of vacations, like every French people, 5 week paid vacation. It's time. How much time do I have? I know that.
Yeah, just maybe quickly say, also in this picture, on this screen, we have some beehives.
Some beekeepers, because what I was going to say, because when you grow one measure to grow sustainable bananas is to the biodiversity that's coming back, and to the point that now they're able to have beekeepers collecting honey, and then it's becoming an industry. So, which is a testimony of how the biodiversity has come back to those banana plants. Go ahead, move on. And when you talk about sustainability, again, you cannot ignore the biodiversity. And Martinique has, and you guys are familiar with biodiversity hotspots, and there's about 34 across the world, and Martinique has 2 of them in terms of biodiversity. So they have like marine life. So, here you go. So this is something called Diamond Rock. It's off the south of Martinique. No one can go there. It's inhabited. It's not habited. It's inhabited. Unhabited. Is unhabited? No, inhabited. Okay. And what you can do, go around, and you see that little fish. Can you come back for just a second? Yeah. You can visit around, and you can snorkel around in. And they have cameras on that island. Only scientists can go on that rock. And they have those cameras to observe the biodiversity. And one thing they had is a snake that they haven't seen anywhere else in the world but on that rock. Go ahead. You can also snorkel or scuba diving and observe the biodiversity. But also, one of the number one spots, because now Martinique is insisting on ecotourism, one of the number spot is to take a hike through that land, that peninsula that's on the east side on the Atlantic side of Martinique. And by the way, Steve and Michel, I've learned also as I was looking at this, that Martinique was the first nation, or was the first place in the Western Hemisphere to grow coffee, And, but, it didn't work out. The reason it didn't work out is because their plantation got sick, and then they went to bananas. And here is another mangrove that we are hoping to take students to in Martinique, and they even have, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the manatee. It's like an animal that grows, they call it a sea cow, It's in water, and they used to have it. They try to bring it back, They have an incredible number of different birds, species, vegetables, and it's right by the ocean, obviously, the mangrove. And that's a place we want to take students with. So
And speaking of where we hope to take students, we're hoping to, well, we're going to be taking students to Martinique, and we hope to also take students to St. Lucia, which is a former British colony. It's an island that's within eyesight of Martinique on a clear day. And we hope to go there to compare and contrast what it's like for a Caribbean island that has become independent versus one that's still a territory of a European nation. And so it'll be an interesting contrast between the two. As far as when we're hoping to take students, we're hoping to go, or we plan to go, maybe I'll say, the week after finals, May of 2023. So you've got about a year and a half to plan for this. And even if you're no longer at Johnson County Community College at that time, keep in mind you can still sign up for these trips, whether it be Costa Rica or Martinique, and you can go on these trips. You'll enroll in one college credit, but you're more than welcome to join us. Or on behalf of Dr. McFarland, Belize is also another option you might want to look into. Jeanette, back to you. Oh, and by the way, this is where Dr. Elizabeth and I had breakfast every morning. This was our view. Unbelievable. Anyway, I'll leave you with this image from the last night of, or first night rather, of our trip from the hotel as well. Anyway, there you go.
Well, we have seen some beautiful, beautiful places today, and I so appreciate all of the faculty who have presented today, and I am looking forward to marketing your trips, which I hope to start doing. I'm going to email you this coming spring. And so thanks for everybody for coming. We have one more session this semester. It will be on Wednesday, November 17. So the Wednesday before Thanksgiving week, which will also be International Education Week. And that time we will discuss Germany and Mexico. So anyway, until then, stay safe. Good luck to all the students and have a good rest of the day.